We'll start with our normal prayer for teacher-student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Dvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So I was saying earlier that we've changed subjects. Tuesday is question answer now, and Wednesday is a topic. Topic I selected was divine grace as time. We can have a concept of time and grace as the same kind of thing, something that flows. But before I start, I may as well say that this is really a repetition of a talk in response to a question that was from a group, a specific group, French group, and we meet once a month. And the purport of the question really was, what is the relationship difference between two types of time? One type which says that we see an opportune moment in time. It is the right time, the right place to do something significant, that kind of time. And the other kind of time is, as we would normally classify time, we might say the Greek for one would be chronos, and kairos would indicate timeliness. So these two things. And how our view of all this changes our perception as we change. And, the right time that causes a flow, and in particular reference was to a particular, you see, flow, there's a flow theory of time. And it's around a seminal work which calls Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. And it is by a neurologist called, or psychologist really, Csikszentmihalyi. Csikszentmihalyi. In this theory, he outlines his theory that people are happiest when they're in a state of flow. What do we mean by flow? Well, in this case, we have alternative words. When you concentrate on something, you may feel that you're in the zone, is an expression. I'm in the zone. I'm in the groove, the modern language for it. In other words, time is seen as a seamless flow. So I always remember telling somebody who was a little disorganized, you see, you should do a time management process, a time management course. And the person said, oh yes, I'd love to, but I don't have time for it. So there's a kind of dichotomy when it comes to the subject of time, because it's a debate within modern science, and I have to be a little scientific now. Is science an illusion? Or is there something really that we call time? And modern physicists are debating this endlessly, because the presence of a subunit and a series of subunits called time is intrinsic to a quantum gravity theory known as loop dynamics, possibly you can say it, or loop theory. But then there is another version of it which says, no, Einstein said in a letter, time is an illusion, but a very real one. And that was attributed to Einstein in a short letter. And maybe it was taken a little out of context. I'm not sure if he believed it, but he has some theories relative to it. In 1905, a great revolution took place, and Einstein delivered his special relativity. And the special relativity is really to do with the relative aspect of motion in time. Things move in time. Time at least is a registration of moving things, whether it's a moving person or whether it's an event. And so he gives many illustrations of this. An observer standing there will see that emotion is happening in different ways, different to a person, let's say, moving in a train. So it is seen to be a different perspective. And it highlights one important thing called an observer. When we experience some kind of motion or some kind of change, the inference is very clear. There's a static observer that is not moving and not subject to time. An unchanging, infinite, also undivided entity. Because space and time come together according to Einstein, and he puts this in his special relativity. It's an astonishing point of view. It's a point of view that many people bypass, and many scientists bypass. But there's a question asked, what is the time-space separation between two events? And he deals with special relativity in a geometric way, noting something like Pythagoras' theorem, the angles, the hypotenuse and all that, we're all familiar with it, the inverse square law. He puts this inverse square law also in space and time, making time a further dimension. We know that space has 3 dimensions. We know that it has an X, Y, Z axis. For example, you want to measure a room, then you have to find out what is its length, what is its breadth, and then what is the height, so, let's say, to the ceiling. Now you have a volumetric measurement. You have a good spatial understanding and awareness of what is there, so that if you want to put a carpet in the room, you know the area. And if you want to calculate, let us say artificial air going in, or you want to calculate maybe heating systems, then you have a relationship to volume. Now, nobody ever thinks when they make these measurements about time. But Einstein thought about this long and hard and deeply, and he puts time in as a 4th dimension. X, Y, Z, and T. T for time, and we can summarize the X, Y, and Z as simply X. X means time. Means space, and T means time. And this wonderful, wonderful equation he puts in his special relativity. What is the time-space separation between 2 events? We can represent it as an S, a big capital S. And of course, being an inverse square law and all the rest of it, being that, and to do with hypotenuse and so on and so forth. You know 2 sides, you'll know the 3rd one, all of those kinds of things. He has to put in squared. We can take that out and make it very simple. So S, the total time space between 2 events, here and there, then and now, equals space, let's say X, comes in with a plus, minus T, time. It's a remarkable equation, because when it says it goes to 0. The total time-space separation, he qualifies it in a vacuum, that is, if nothing else disturbs it, goes to 0. This is a remarkable equation that tells us about something called Maya. Maya, an inscrutable component manifesting as what we described as nature, having three evolutionary forces within it, and the combination of these comes out as our world, our relative world. And in the relative world, we have relative space and relative time. It's everything is relative to who? To the one that is observing it through the limited observing faculties, which act as a kind of interpretation. And we can say that the mind is the queen bee of these faculties. So that where the mind goes, everything else goes. Like a queen bee moving, everything else goes and moves with it. What this equation says really is that there is only a perceiver, that there is no separation between the perceiver and the perceived. Of course, we know this about dreams because in dreams there's only one dreamer. And from that dreamer, all the dreams and components in the dream become manufactured. But in the waking state, as it were, the waking state of consciousness, what is there? It is only one observer. This remarkable statement is an endorsement and ratification of what the ancient people already had established, that there is only one existence, but when you add the dimensions of space and time, in other words, when you put position, when you put in space where objects have to occupy it, when you put in a dividedness, and when you put in a measurement of motion and change called time, then we can call this time-space continuum as Einstein himself does. Instead of putting space separately, time separately, a time-space continuum. The answer, therefore, is time an illusion? Is both yes and it is no. Why do we say no? Well, for obvious reasons. You're looking at me, you're looking at the screen, and that means that there is a separation of maybe some split seconds. There is a delay. The light from the sun takes 8.5 minutes to reach us. When we look out into the stars and galaxies and what have you, we're looking at all of these in the past. It takes time for light to reach the eye. It takes some time for the brain, if you like, if you want to use that language, to interpret what is there. And it takes time for us to react. All of this seems to be like a sequence, and yet it is all registered in the past. All our reactions are registered in the past. And as soon as I said past, is now the past. So we can view time as a kind of flow, because that's our experience, because we all register, despite any debate whether it's real, whether it's unreal, etc. We all experience it in a real way. We think that there was a past, we can recall it through memory, and we know what it looks like. And we can be conscious of it. We can anticipate that there will be a future. And in between, the meeting point of past and future would be what is the present moment, a kind of arriving unit, a kind of subsection of a second. Let us even say, we can say a second. And what is the advantage to us? It means that all the conditioning that we ever had that sits in the unconscious area can be transformed. It can be transformed by making use of both time and space, principally time, and say, here's a blank check that arrives, we call it a second. And despite all the other checks that were misused in the past, we can at least take this that arrived, as it were, from the future and put something useful in a series. And when we do that, we put a kind of banking investment. We put a kind of fixed deposit on it in the unconscious mind. And if it is to do with truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony, all the positive things that we have, I mentioned this a little bit last night, then it becomes a reforming movement underneath everything. When we repeat, let us say, the glories of God endlessly, and when we repeat His name, called japa, it saturates the mind, it settles down in the unconscious area, and becomes a reactive habit that is useful to us on two counts. First of all, it brings us closer to the truth. It purifies our understanding. It purifies our mind. But the second advantage is that thought is a suction coming from the unconscious area, and it's creating our environment that matches every thought. And so we can see that if we take time to be a flow, and if we want not to be disturbed by this flow, first of all, we have to understand, well, a time-space continuum is there. And space and time, as conceived by Einstein, gives us or revives an ancient concept of what the world is made from. And Einstein uses a kind of weaving example. You have a cloth, you need threads going one way, let's say vertically, you need the other threads going horizontally, let us say, from the perceiver's point of view. And the interweaving of these two makes one whole fabric. And this is the language, the fabric of space and time. Space-time continuum and the fabric of space-time, giving us a new understanding of gravity. Not Isaac Newton's mechanical clock system, because Isaac Newton didn't regard time in any relative way. A kind of imaginary clock that runs the universe in a systematic, deterministic way. A clockwork universe where if you understand every factor and variable as part of a collected data in the universe, then you can predict anything you like. So everything runs on a rhythmic time. What kind of time? Divine time. Because Newton was profoundly spiritual, religious, he believed in God. But unfortunately, if the universe runs in a clockwork way, you might be tempted to ask, what's the use of God? Well, God was a watchmaker and makes sure the universe runs correctly, but then he could easily then go on holiday. And then you have a deistic form of God, not a theistic form of God. And then it's only one small step to say, actually, I'm not sure if that God is relevant. Perhaps there's a blind watchmaker. Perhaps the universe is just a self-renewing, self-activating, self-winding clock. So all of these kinds of philosophical cogitations and arguments come into it. But we can't deny our own experience. And since we see that according to the Vedanta philosophy, there's only one entity. We call this Brahman. And then when you add time and space, desha, kala, and also kriya, function, then the universe is as we understand it. And this understanding is only an interpretation through time. Now time, the whole debate about time, is something like this, that mathematically, time can run forward or backwards. You won't know the difference. Supposing you came into the middle of a movie and you rewound the movie, in a certain way, a certain direction. Forward and backward, well, maybe you can't determine it, but there's one law which seems to break it. And that is the law of thermodynamics. It is the law of entropy. And entropy is a measure of scrambledness. And you can't unscramble something that is scrambled. You can take eggs, you can break them, you can mix all that up and scramble them, but how to unscramble them? No, not possible. So it indicates that there's possibly some kind of arrow of time which is irreversible. And regardless of whether it is so or not, it is our experience that we can take advantage of an opportunity divinely provided. Why do we say divinely provided? If there's only one entity, and the entity is operating, as it were, or manifesting its relative nature through time and space, then we can say that the Bhagavad Gita makes sense, the 11th chapter, when the Bhagavan, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, when he says, Kalosmi loka sayakri pravruto logan samadartam iha pavritaha ratipi tvam na bhavishanti sarveya vastitaha payan ekesha yodaha. I am the mighty, world-destroying time. That means time is also a consumer. You've heard, we all have heard. How much time did you waste? How much time did you use? We view time as a resource. And yet, of course, we know the relativity of time. We know from special relativity that there's a speed limit to light. We know that the motion is limited. We know that we can't measure anything further than that. The speed limit is there. It operates as motion and time. We know that the perspective of time looks different from different angles. True. We also know that time can slow, as it were, and can speed up. We know that the faster we go through space, the more the time slows down. We know for a fact that there is this variance because we have atomic clocks. We know the effect of gravity on time. We know that, according to Einstein, a different idea of gravity is put when we see that there's an interval between bodies. The fabric of space and time is seen to be something like a flexible fabric susceptible to mass. And when mass impinges on it, we have gravitational lensing, and we also have motion. There's an explanation why the Earth moves around the sun. It's all to do with the mass impinging on this fabric. And this has been tried and tested over and over and over again, giving us a different understanding of gravity, a better understanding of gravity that has different calculations for different functions over and above Newton's calculations for his version of gravity. Both of them work in their own ways in different contexts. And so this component of Maya, we're not surprised when the Lord says that I am the mighty, world-destroying time. I come as time, and I'm now engaged in the wiping out the world completely, even without the events happening today or the events described in the Bhagavad Gita, where the warriors are arrayed in hostile armies. We know that the Lord of the universe, coming as time, will know what is going to happen in the future, because in the Lord's area, there's no past or present or future. There's the old story, you see, of a devotee who has a vision of God. God appears and he says, do you have any questions, my child? Oh, yes. What question do you have? Well, you see, if I have something like €1 billion, what does it mean in heavenly time? Oh, to me, it's a few cents. Oh, and then I see, what about time? What is 100 years of our lifetime to you? Or even 1,000 years? Oh, that's a mere blink of an eye. It's a mere second. Oh, I see. But anyway, you have a request, my child. Oh, yes, I would really need to have $1 billion. euros. All right, my child, wait a second. So that's the joke. But anyway, because of this, I come as time, says the Lord. Arise and win glory. Conquer your enemies, that is, the enemies of your mind. Use the time to do it, because it's a flow of divine grace that is coming to you, presenting you with an opportunity to insert something noble, something useful, and to saturate the mind with noble ideas. That noble ideas come from all sides, says the Vedas, the Rig Veda. So, what would we do to maximize this time? Well, concentration comes into this. If we are to take the psychologist describing the flow of time as being completely involved in an activity for its own sake, the ego falls away if we do this, and time flies, and every action and movement and thought follows inevitably from the previous one. It's like, playing a jazz. Your whole being is involved. You're using your skills to the utmost. So if we mention a great, great genius who was able to think in an unusual, inventive way, such as Einstein, what would be his formula? If we would take a great musician such as Beethoven, with seemingly a connection line to the divine, producing this unbelievably heavenly music, where every note lands in the right place, and yet using unconventional formulas. From a few notes, da 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 da, we can say, a whole symphony is produced. Wonderful symphony is produced. Not exactly a melody in the conventional sense, and yet we know where every note should land. And musicians say it's as if Beethoven had this connection to God, and we know how spiritual he was. Not that he attended church or understood theology or anything of this nature, but when walking, even when he was hard of hearing, going toward deafness, still this inner connection was there, and it is down to concentration, a magnificent obsession that says, I don't know when I eat, when I drink. Same with Einstein, pondering over a question, pondering it in an unusual way, using kind of caricatures in his own mind, based on and framed as, what if there's a person in a rocket passing another one at a different speed? What if somebody is in an elevator? Will they have the sensation of gravity or the sensation of something accelerating? Now he has a novel idea. So, and these ideas have been tried and tested, of course. So now, the key component is maybe in a definition. What is concentration? Concentration is an absence to the mind of a sense of time. You can see if my talk is engaging, you say, oh, where did the time go? Is that the time? That kind of thing. And so when the mind is fully concentrated, that is, when all these scattered mental forces, all the array of thoughts and feelings and so on, all the activities in the mental frame or the mental field, when they're all gathered together and projected in one way, it acts like a laser beam. This process, withdrawing all these energies from everywhere and projecting in one direction, requires a number of components. Firstly, it requires enthusiasm. It requires motivation. It requires that the challenge of any activity and the skill required for it is in a kind of balance. And we can achieve as flow state a balance that is struck between the challenge of the task itself and the skill of you, the performer. Because if the task is too easy or too difficult, then the flow cannot occur as both skill level and challenge level. It must be matched. It must be high. And if the skill and challenge are low and matched, then then apathy can result. So we know it's the first thing. So what is concentration in the case of, let's say, Beethoven, Einstein, the yogis, the mystics? Well, or even thinkers of today, profound thinkers. It means they have no sense of time. There's a continuous flow of time of which they are aware. It runs in the background. But precisely, they don't know. After all, the way we measure time is every clock, every watch is simply just duplicating the movement, as it were, or the Earth's movement, to be more precise, around the sun. And we measure seasons in this way because of the wonderful tilted axis of the Earth at, let's say, 23, 24 degrees. And then we get these beautiful seasons. We are in the midst of a transition between winter and spring now. And as we say to the country folk, spring in the air, and they reply, of course, no, why should I? So we have this measure of time, but it's purely related to our solar system. And not only our solar system, but it's related to the Earth and the sun's relationship. And time may well be measured differently in different parts of the universe, of course. That is why we know it is a changing relative thing. But if we are to use this time as units for directing our attention, it becomes revealing. Several things happen. It becomes a revealer, like a laser beam. It becomes a rewarder, because we feel we have accomplished something within the framework. And so merging of action and awareness is another component. Having a clarity of goals, having a clarity of where we're destined to go, and leaving it there, and then enjoying the flow of the process itself. And then we need immediate and unambiguous feedback. We need to concentrate on the unit task at hand with a certain formula. How many things do we have to do? How many actions we have to do? And the answer is one, and then another one, and then another one. And completing one unit activity, we're forgetting all the others. And in this way, we become efficient. We conform to the great formula of Karma Yoga in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where yoga is defined. Yoga meaning concentration or concentration of activity, Karma Yoga. And so there we have the description that it is all actions done with an equilibrium of mind on the one hand. I mentioned this last night. And an efficiency on the other. That is, we make full use of the resource, knowing that it is the Divine Lord saying, here's a flow, and I'll present it in units. I'll hold my hands up and say, here, my child, here's a second. What will you do with it? And often we throw it off, saying, here, I hate my neighbor's nose, or what a pity, I'm not well, or I wonder if, I wonder what, etc. It requires the paradox of control. It requires a transformation of time as resource into a continuous flow. And it requires loss of self-consciousness as a result. And what we call autotelic experience, that is, there is meaning and purpose from within. And maybe this is the primary driving force. So, this last one, according to Csikszentmihalyi, in his research, it's one thing that he did research. He claims that there has to be an autotelic kind of personality. And it is one which a person performs acts because they're intrinsically rewarding rather than to achieve external goals. It's not about the reward of the goal, it's about the reward of the process itself. And it is described as an autotelic personality, as a trait possessed by people who can learn to enjoy situations that most others might interpret and find as not rewarding or not positive. They might find it miserable. And we know that we have this capacity to transform all the anxiety and worry and negativity into something positive by using this trait of awareness of time. And it would include such things as curiosity, persistence, humility. There's often a condition at a certain age where a person says, "Oh, I want to retire." And my reply, of course, is, my response is, well, did you get tired first before you get retired? And unless the mind is occupied with at least a hobby or an interest. So my formula is learn something new and exciting every day. Register it. Take something, and we're in the midst of a huge, huge volume of information available at our fingertips through the internet. The World Wide Web has produced a worldwide capacity for us to understand everything and anything we like. Suppose saying you are asked to do something and you don't know how to do it. Then what will you do? You'll consult the almighty Google, or you'll consult the YouTube, where you can get a visual and audio step-by-step tuition. Now, this is remarkable in this modern age. It also can act as a major distraction as well, but as something that is functional and something that has a utility in our favor, we can use it. But you see, most of Csikszentmihalyi's final works were dedicated to focusing on the idea of this motivation, the factors that contribute to motivation. And part of the motivation we find in Patanjali Yoga Sutras with regards to concentration. What happens if we don't have it? Well, he lists a whole lot of things, a whole lot of symptoms. First of all, vyadi, that means disease. Disease comes to us. Sthana, samshaya, pramada, a whole lot of things. Let's go through them. Disease, physical, it has a physical impact negatively on one. Mental laziness can come in. Doubt can come in. Lack of enthusiasm can come in. Lethargy, clinging to sense enjoyments. False perception, non-attaining of concentration. And falling away from the state, even when concentration is obtained. These are obstructing distractions, according to Patanjali's analysis. Then, what about the remedy, or what about symptoms that come from these things? These are the results. Are there evidences that we can observe in ourselves? Yes. It goes on. It begins with dukkha and so on. Grief, mental distress, tremor of the body, irregular breathing. These all accompany the retention of, the non-retention of, I should say, of concentration. Swami Vivekananda's commentaries on these is very insightful. In terms of disease, he says, this body is the boat which will carry us to the other shore of the ocean of life. Sister Nivedita's last words are so beautiful, as if looking out at the sunset, my boat is sinking. Anyway, it must be taken care of. Unhealthy people cannot be yogis. Mental laziness makes us lose all lively interest in the subject, without which there would be neither the will nor the energy to practice. Doubts will arise in the mind about the truth of the science, however strong one's intellectual conviction may be, until certain peculiar psychic experiences come, as hearing or seeing at a distance, etc. He's talking specifically about the yogis. These glimpses strengthen the mind and make the student persevere. And then falling away, etc. Some days or weeks when you are practicing, the mind will be calm. It'll be easily concentrated, and you'll find yourself progressing fast. But all of a sudden, you find the progress will stop one day. You'll find yourself, as it were, stranded, and you require perseverance. All progress proceeds by such a rise and a fall, because progress is really not typically linear. As long as the trend is in a certain direction, we're okay. But expect variations in it. Don't be hard on yourself. These variations will come. You cultivate an element of persistence despite that. Never mind. Yesterday is another day. This morning is another day. 5 seconds ago is another period of time. A new blank check is coming. And then you see, you will say that concentration will bring perfect repose. It'll bring perfect repose to mind and body every time it's practiced. And when the practice has been misdirected or not enough controlled, these disturbances come. Repetition of a mantra such as Om and self-surrender to the Lord will strengthen the mind and bring fresh energy. The nervous shakings will come to almost everyone. Don't mind them at all, but keep on practicing. Practice will cure them and make the seat firm. So to remedy this comes Patanjali's next recommendation, that we really need to practice one subject, focus, and I might add one thing at a time, making the mind take the form of one object and so on, like that. And then there's an attitude that comes with it in the context of spiritual progress, but also normal social relationships, with an understanding of holism, what you do at all, what you think. You're incorporated in the effect. It'll come to you. If there's only a one thing, one nature, then the effect will come to you also. And so these are the qualities: Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha, Sukha Dukkha, Punya, Apunya, Vishayam, like that. Bhavanataha. Friendship. Start with friendship. Be friendly to everybody. Genuinely friendly, without reserve. Have compassion. Have compassion for those who are unsuccessful or suffering. Be glad and joyful for those who are successful. And be indifferent to any subjects, happy or unhappy, good and evil, respectively, any pairs of opposites, any virtue and vice, then have no direction one way or the other. When you cultivate these qualities, you are pacifying what is called chitta. Chitta is made from pure stuff. Chitta is the mind stuff, the stuff of the mind. So the commentary goes further. We must have these 4 sorts of ideas. We must have friendship for all. We must be merciful towards those that are in misery. When people are happy, we ought to be happy. And to the wicked, we must be indifferent. So with all subjects that come before us, if the subject is a good one, we shall feel friendly towards it. If the subject of thought is one that is miserable, we must be merciful toward it. If it is good, we must be glad. If it is evil, we must be indifferent. These attitudes of the mind towards the different subjects that come before it will make the mind peaceful. Most of our difficulties in our daily lives come from being unable to hold our minds in this way. And for instance, if a person does evil to us, then instantly we want to react, and every reaction of evil shows that we're not able to hold this pure chitta, this mind stuff down. Because don't forget, we're aiming for it not to erupt into waves. It comes out in waves towards the object and we lose our power. And every reaction in the form of hatred or evil is so much loss to the mind. And every evil thought or deed of hatred or any thought of reaction, if it's controlled, will be laid in our favor. It's not that we lose by thus restraining ourselves. We are gaining infinitely more than we suspect. Each time we suppress hatred or a feeling of anger, there's so much good energy stored up in our favor that piece of energy will be converted into the higher powers. Now, you may recall that I'm against any repression. So what does Swami Vivekananda mean? Well, by suppress, it means neutralize. Neutralize with a better idea. So this is the value of making use of time and the flow of time, which is divine. It has a divine origin. And if we are careful, we can see that grace comes to us, arrives to us as a kind of flow, unasked, but arriving at our substation called the human person, the human condition, loosely called an owner called I, an agent. And when it arrives, we should surely acknowledge it as something beautiful and positive, and be an open channel, as it were, for this grace to flow through us to others. This way we can beam the very goodness that we have cultivated within ourselves. We can be a light of pure love to all and sundry, unconditionally. So this is the subject that was discussed the other night in relation to a question. And I'm not sure if I really answered the question. So it was really, what is the difference between time as such and timeliness? Well, you see, if it is true to say, I come as Kala, I come as time, tuning into that essence, that essential divinity, will give us a sense of divine timeliness. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. When we align these two wills in this present moment, then we understand the right time, the right place to do things. We just know it. We have faith in it, that this is the right timing. And when we look back on all your achievements, the older you get, you see how the timing is impeccable. We can kind of see it as a cosmic dancer with the timeliness of a dance, where every foot is placed exactly in the cosmic dance at the right time, at the right place. And we shouldn't be anxious. We shouldn't impose our own time agenda on it. We should be patient enough to wait for the Lord of Time to act out its own nature as time itself. And time is a consumer. Time is death, because every moment that arises is an advance. We are born in order that we can later on die. Live, of course, in between, no doubt. But every one of the cells comes and goes. And over 7 years, the entire body has been reproduced and replaced over time. And so let us use this resource, acknowledging it with joined palms, that time is truly a divine flow, a divine resource, and is part of the eternal grace, along with other things provided for us. And it has two effects. One effect is to delude us in the relative world, and the other effect is to liberate us in this same world. Because by the use of these resources, we are able to pacify the citta and purify the mind, and see our own true infinite nature that lies, as it were, below it, and is expressed through it. And you see, it must be like that, because time, when you take time away, when you take space and time away, as Einstein has done, then what remains? What remains is the undivided, because the undivided is a space issue, as I say to many people, and you have the unchanging, because change is a time issue. And then when you find boundaries, functional boundaries, you have the infinite. Now this is existence and consciousness and bliss absolute. And the evidence for it is that when you put in these conditional ways, these lenses, if you like, of space, time, and also add individual functionality, then you have the relative world. And the relative world is also a manifestation of that oneness. It's not exclusive of it. It's not that we have to transcend it. We have to embrace it, enjoy it, with a view to liberating us from the delusive aspect of it and taking advantage of the knowing or revealing aspect of it. We'll finish off then. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.